Okay, we're at the second half of our discussion today, and this part is a little bit more, is going to be more of a discussion about the compliance check survey that I had been conducting since early April. I just completed the results. I sent Tom an advance copy, and I have an advance copy. Of course, I don't know if you've experienced a compliance check survey, Tom, but I certainly have. I've experienced quite a few of them, and it sort of inspired me to do this because my personal experience with compliance check surveys vary depending on who had conducted them. And another individual or two had contacted me earlier this year after one of these big multi-jurisdictional operations where the U.S. Marshals were involved. And the U.S. Marshals are real buttholes. I mean, they were very rude and nasty to me, very intimidating, very threatening. Tried to demand a warrantless search. I didn't allow them to do it. Hey, you remember that day, Tom, because I called you on the phone about it. And, and you recorded the conversation because I went outside and I told you those people were still out there. And I got into a shouting match with the U.S. Marshal. He came over to me and started threatening me and stuff. And
well, I think his right-along companion, as you said, was a Homeland Security fellow.
Oh yeah, that clown, and everything. But I do. As a matter of fact, on TalkShoe, which is what we use to record these things before posting them to YouTube. I'll post the link later on. You can go to my past episodes on the TalkShoe under Reform Radio, where I posted it up on May the 21st, 2013. It's only like a minute and a half long, and it's me arguing with this U.S. Marshal. So I took them to court. Of course, they kept dismissing it over technical things. I didn't space it properly, or I didn't write the brief up the way that they wanted, or whatever. I never really got my day in court. I eventually gave up. I tried. And so, have you ever had a in-home compliance check or in-person compliance check, Tom?
Well, I did way back in probably around 2006 or so. I was actually on a nice summer day working in my backyard doing some repairs on my house at the time, and I had heard that the Portland police were doing these compliance checks, and I didn't think that as a misdemeanor that I would ever get somebody knocking on my door. But that one day they did. I didn't hear them. They were knocking on the door, ringing the doorbell, and so forth, not getting an answer. I'm running machines in the backyard making noise, so they took it upon themselves to come along the driveway into the backyard, and as I was using a power drill, I heard this voice over my shoulder. I turned around, and there are two Portland police officers. They are smiling. These are two women police officers, smiling and getting me to, signaling me to take off my goggles and shut down the machinery for a minute and talk to them. And I was surprised. Well, who are you? What are you here for? Oh, we're here doing a compliance check. Obviously, you live here, you're working here, and we're just making sure that you are where you're supposed to be, they said. And they handed me a sheet of paper. They wanted me to sign it and, confirming that they had been there. And I looked at them and I said, I'm really sad that we live in a society where police come and interrupt citizens' lives to do the kinds of checking they're doing today. These laws are unfair. They're outrageously wrong. They represent a police state, and you can imagine what else I might have said. I took that paper, I crumpled it, and threw it back at them at their feet and told them to get off my property. And they said, well, you should have thought about that before you committed your crime. And I said, get off the property. And I followed them around the driveway to their big Portland Police Department SUV. And they drove off. But it had me very, very angry at the time that a law-abiding citizen like I was, minding my own business and so forth, being interrupted by a policeman or police women coming to my not just to my front door, which would have been bad enough, but to that private backyard area. I was incensed.
Yeah. How many of them do you think you've endured over the years? I know you've been registered a long time, and so have I.
Just that one.
But how many? Just one. Just once. You're so damn lucky. You know what? Over the years, it's changed around here. It used to be every 3 months I would have to wait on the local sheriff's deputy to come around. You know, he would always do it within a week after, after a week of going to register. And if I missed him, he would leave this thing on the door. And they've kind of not been doing that lately, but then they did the compliance check operation about 3 years ago, which I already mentioned. I think after I moved here, they had an officer come by, and he left a notice on my door, and I called him to see if he was going to come back, and he just says, well, he already knows me. He already knows how I am. And he's just like, well, I already know you live there. That's good enough for me. You got the sign, and that was all, the little notice, and that was good enough for him. So I haven't had to deal with it since then. That's been my experience with it. They're usually pretty laid back here in Cincinnati. Of course, the U.S. Marshal, he was a Buford T. Justice type character. So anyways, getting on to the results here. You weren't on probation at the time when this occurred, were you?
I was not on probation. I had just finished probation in 2005, and that was around 2006. So yes, after probation.
Right. Yeah, I'm not on. I was never on probation either. According to the survey, 3/4 of the individuals who responded to this survey were not on supervision. So, that's kind of important to bring out. As I stated earlier, you're lucky because you've only had one compliance check, whereas half of respondents to the survey had experienced a compliance check within 3 months prior to taking the survey. Just over a fourth of them were subject to a compliance check within a month of taking the survey. Almost 3 out of 5 respondents have endured multiple compliance checks within the past year, and 3 out of 5 respondents have endured at least 10 compliance checks total during their registration period. So, very frequently these things happen to registrants. How were these people? How were the individuals dressed when they came to your house?
In Portland Police Department attire.
Just your standard outfit then.
Right, badges, blue uniform, all the rest. And they did not have sidearms, I will say, but otherwise official looking.
Yeah, the county police here. When they show up, they usually just show up in in standard uniform. But the person who generally had been doing it over the years had been the process server. The person who also goes around and issues court summonses and whatnot. And so he's really not conspicuous. But when the U.S. Marshal came to my door, and of course that's where I kind of flew off the handle at him. He had showed up in full SWAT gear, aside from the helmets. He didn't have the helmet on, but he had the vest on the outside with U.S. Marshal service on the back and all this stuff. With their green, with that olive drab green military kind of color uniforms on, and with his with the crew cut, looked fresh out of the academy type person.
I can predict how these things are going to go. If you want to talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, we'll get to that. At the moment, I'm just going to go. I'm bringing this up because I'm talking about this as I'm bringing up the statistics. Thankfully, only 1 in 10 of respondents reported seeing officers in any kind of gear, SWAT type gear, at their doorstep. None reported seeing SWAT-type vehicles, no MRAPs to do, and minesweepers to do compliance checks, thankfully. But respondents did, in the comment sections, said that they, had mentioned other forms of intimidation tactics, dressing in all black, for example, arriving in large numbers. A handful of places have special clothing marked sex offender unit or special victims unit, something along those lines, which, of course, it doesn't just affect them. It also affects, the individuals in the household because, in nearly half the cases where other people were present in the household at the time of the compliance check, the officers addressed the other members of the household. And 1 out of every 10 of these events, the officers pulled those people off to decide to speak to them individually away from the registrant. So there's definitely a lot of intimidation involved. Did this officer act intimidating to you in any way?
No, it was, actually, my interpretation of it, the whole thing afterward was that it was highly downplayed. The fact that they had women doing this, not men. The fact they did not have sidearms, as I mentioned. The fact that they tried to be chirpy and pleasant at the beginning of the encounter. So I'll give them credit for that.
Officer friendly is how I refer to them in the study.
Right. So my experience with it, although I will tell you, it wasn't once, it was twice. I just happen to remember that it was another special case in Beaverton, Oregon. I was living there probably in this is 2005, so I was on probation, or just barely off probation. And yes, I did have a knock on the door. The Beaverton, Oregon Police Department is very aggressive in making sure these compliances are met with to the letter of the law. And of course, Beaverton, Oregon is in, for those of you that know Oregon, it's in Washington County. And if you know politics in Oregon, you know that Washington County is Oregon's fascist police state county. And naturally, all police forces there will do their utmost to arrest you for the slightest infraction.
Right. Speaking of officer attitudes, this is the next major part of the survey I'm going to get into now. In the course of doing this, I asked about 3 specific types of law enforcement. One was your local level police force, which is, city, county, township, those types. Then I asked specifically about the U.S. Marshals, since the U.S. Marshals, of course, they think that they have the authority to do compliance check operations because of the Adam Walsh Act, which, of course, that's a discussion I'll bring up again here later on. So the U.S. Marshals Service does their own compliance checks, which tends to be the multi-jurisdictional ones where they get where they're all working together. And then I asked one specifically about Parents for Megan's Law, which is the private victim industry advocate group from Suffolk County, New York, which is tasked with doing compliance check operations for that particular location. And there were 7 officer types, and I will describe them very briefly. We have, officer friendly, which is the overall pleasant demeanor. You have the classic Mutt Jeff, good cop, bad cop routine. You have RoboCop, which is just by the book, cold, just doing my job type person. The Barney Fife, who the big blowhard, incompetent, big talker, typically you're fresh out of the academy, wet behind the ears types. The Buford The Buford T. Justice, the authoritarian, bossy, rude type. The Joe Friday, which is the very nosy, trying to ask you a ton of questions. And then the Law and Order SVU types, which are just very verbally abusive, treat you like a complete scumbag. Based upon my way of organizing law enforcement and asking individuals to gauge the officer behavior, respondents were most likely to report local law enforcement as officer-friendly types, Mutt and Jeff types, or RoboCops, whereas the U.S. Marshals were reported to most likely be the Buford T. Justice, Joe Friday, and SVU types. I didn't get a lot of response from people I think there was only 15 people who had had compliance checks from the private group Parents for Megan's Law, but pretty much everything had been, the responses were pretty much in the same range as the results for both local and federal agents. So really couldn't gauge their unique behavior based upon this particular survey, although the most frequent response was they were robocops. And so, so the bottom line is that if you get a police check from a U.S. Marshal, you're more likely to get attitude, which I'm not surprised because I certainly got an attitude from the one who showed up at my door. So that kind of confirms my suspicions about that. I've got two more, and the last one I think is the one that's really going to get your attention, Tom. But, next one, of course, we're overstating the obvious here. Compliance checks have immediate and long-term negative consequences for registered citizens. An overwhelming majority of respondents agreed that the registry led to feelings of anger, worry over the effects of these compliance checks on the loved ones living with them, concern over how the neighbors will react, fear of retaliation, and feeling like they've been treated like a criminal or a suspect of a crime. In addition, 1 in 4 reported experiencing some form of harassment shortly after experiencing a compliance check operation. But what was shocking is that almost 10% of respondents agreed to the statement that the registry was a, quote, necessary evil to ensure registrants are obeying the law. And I'm sure you probably have a strong opinion on that one.
Yes.
Are you there, Tom? Yes.
Yes. Derek, you cut out for about the last 10 seconds. If you could repeat that last part, please.
Okay, we'll try this again. I don't know what the hell is happening. I said, surprisingly, 8.81% of respondents agreed the registry was a necessary evil to ensure registered citizens are obeying the registration laws.
Yes,
did you hear me?
Well, yes, I did. And that's, of course, you hear that all the time, whether it's on the street, we encountering someone arguing in favor of the registration law, or online, the many blogs and comment sections we get into. And because I think that the mindset in defense of their support of the registry law is that we have to protect children. Again, children are not just little people; they're sacred beings, and they cannot defend themselves. And so, even if we put 1,000 registrants in our community on the registry, all of them on the registry, if it just prevents one chance in a billion, then it was worth it. So we don't mind destroying the lives forever and ever of those 1,000 registered sex offenders if we can just protect the precious, sacred little life of a child, no matter what the cost. And I think that's...
but this is, I mean, to me it's surprisingly that even that many individuals who are on the registry who have experienced compliance checks, feel that the registry is still necessary. And surprisingly enough, I will say this much: I looked at the percentage of individuals who reported negative consequences of those who agree that the registry is a necessary evil, and there really was not much of a difference between those who report it, those who agree with the registry and those who don't, in terms of feeling like they've experienced necessary consequences, except in one instance, and that was that only half of respondents who agree with the premise of the registry reported feelings of anger immediately after a compliance check, whereas those who didn't, it was closer to 90%. So, that aside from that, the other things I mentioned, about war concerns over effects of others in the household, experiencing harassment, feeling afraid to walk down the street, that's all about the same for, those who agree with the registry, who are registrants, and those who don't agree with the registry. Interesting, it's interesting. But here's the one that I know is really going to get you going. I asked the last part is awareness of your rights. As you know, the Fourth Amendment guarantees us, if we're not on supervision, which means probation or parole people, the Fourth Amendment guarantees us the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. So if you're not on supervision, officers need a warrant to enter your household. Now, that's not going to stop them from asking. And I assure you, when the U.S. Marshal came to my door, they asked, hey, could I come in and see your bedroom to assure you're living there? My response was, do you have a warrant? And he said no. And I said, well, you ain't getting into my house. And he said he was going to come back. I said, well, next time you come back, bring a warrant. And he didn't.
Yeah.
So
slide it on the door, and when you have it, I'll review it first.
So anyways, we know you and I, we know our rights, Tom. However, about 1 in 6 respondents to our survey reported that they were not even aware that they could deny entry into their homes. About 1 in 4 of them were aware of their rights, but allowed officers to conduct warrantless searches out of fear or out of belief of having nothing to hide. Thankfully, of course, this is good news, over half of respondents were both aware of their rights, and they exercised their right to refuse warrantless searches. And I certainly did, and I'm sure you have too, Tom.
Well, there's no excuse for anybody who has gone through the criminal justice meat grinder to having come through that and not then study and come up to speed and really know your constitutional rights inside and outside thoroughly. You're a fool if you don't. And so I may have been ignorant in some regards beforehand, but I guarantee you, in my own personal case, I became a very, very much somebody who understood my constitutional rights, and where before I might not have been so up on it as I should have been. But it's a tough experience to go through, and then to realize that your rights were violated, such as them coming into my home and so forth in those early days, just after arrest and so forth, things I couldn't prevent then. But to know that the Fourth Amendment requires a search warrant is highly important, obviously.
Well, I want to bring up this important thing, too. When I was talking earlier about the subgroup that agree with the premise of the registry being a necessary evil, only 29% of those who agree with the premise of the registry denied warrantless entry into their homes, compared to 56% of those who disagree with the premise of the registry. So, that's interesting that they are more receptive to allowing their rights to be, to be trampled upon. And that, to me, that's very scary.
Well, what the term is when somebody argues that the registry is a necessary evil, what they're basically saying is that the sex offender registry is a necessary violation of the Constitution. In other words, we have to have this. The Constitution doesn't cover this. We have to have this as an exception to the Constitution. And when you realize that in terms of, this is a law that is necessary for this reason, what has happened is that a government has got its foot in the door now. It's got its foot in the door saying, we have one exception. But with that one exception, of course, and because the door now is open, not closed to any exceptions to the Constitution, you can imagine from there the slippery slope that you get into with extensions and expansions and additions to that one foot blocking, holding the door open to the exception. So it's a dangerous path that we're on today, and that should be said more often.
Yeah. So, I'm sure you got some more thoughts on this particular survey. But what's your thoughts on it? I mean, obviously, I wrote my thoughts in the report itself at the very end. In the discussion section, and everything. But what do you take away from this survey?
Well, it seems to me that, first of all, not enough people responded to it. It seemed like they would have participated. I'm not sure what the overall mailing list was like or the notification was like, but it seemed like it was not as many as I would have hoped to have responded to it. But it seems like the numbers that did respond to the questions that we've talked about in this radio recording is that people are mostly aware of their rights. They're mostly coming around to understanding that these compliance checks are something that is dangerous in a democratic society. That these things have got to be re-examined in the courts across the land and reevaluated politically by the people to check where we're at in the progress of our supposedly democratic society.
Right. Well, we certainly can't be accused of any sort of bias or something because, as again, we reported that nearly 10% of respondents agree with the premise of the registry as being a necessary evil, and we address that, even if I don't necessarily like the idea of a registered citizen supporting registries or allowing their constitutional rights to get trampled upon. I do have to mention as a key selling point for this article is that there's a very lengthy addendum, of about 11 pages long that are just the stories that people shared of their personal experiences, tales from compliance check operations, I called it. Some of them are very lengthy, some of them are very short. A lot of people expressed, various degrees of opinions, which I just pretty much cut and paste and, copied verbatim, only leaving out any potentially personal information. I suggest people go and read them. And, as far as a policy implication goes, I think that in light of, about 200 people responded to the survey, 195 to be exact. It's not huge numbers, but it's still, we still were able to glean a lot of good knowledge from the study. And to me, knowing that one of my suspicions were confirmed with the U.S. Marshals being a lot bigger jerks, essentially, we should be very wary of the fact that the AWA Reauthorization Act of 2016 is going to give the U.S. Marshals $61 million to do more of these compliance checks. They're only going to give $20 million to encourage states to update the registries, but $61 million to have the U.S. Marshals, knock on our door and threaten us. And that really bothers me.
It's frightening, especially coming from the federal government. It's a government that is a criminal government run by a kind of mafia criminality with its illegal wars and its looting of the economy, but also in the shredding of our Constitution in any number of areas, and the financing of the expansion of the police states, such as you're talking about with the marshals that would do these compliance checks, and that the penalties that go with failure to register, which are long enough, and I can only imagine they might get longer in the future, longer prison sentences for failure to maintain a regulatory information that's to the T and accurate. I can see the future where it's going. To me, I would guess the future, Derek, would be one where instead of these compliance checks door to door, I can imagine that registrants of the future would have to go to a place like a roll call, like an Army roll call, where soldiers line up, rank and file. If you're not at your billet, they just simply look for the absent billets and send out a warrant for your arrest at that point. If you don't show up at that particular barbed wire parking lot area in your hometown, and have these required military style attendances there at the police station. I think that is something that could come along in the near future. It seems. I'm guessing, but it's a frightening prospect to say the least.
Of course, this this poses the question, well, what, if anything, is anybody planning to do about the reauthorization, or are we just going to kind of just, let it run its course? Because, I think our movement, as we were talking earlier in our previous discussion, I didn't quite bring it out this way, but, I think our movement also suffers from a defeatist attitude. Why bother? We can't do anything on the federal level for whatever reason, and so why bother doing it? Of course, I will say this much: it is a hell of a lot more difficult to do anything on the federal level for the simple fact that federal level legislators are a hell of a lot harder to get a hold of. It's harder to get heard. You have to be invited to testify before Congress, and that's a load of horse crap. Right. That they do it that way. I mean, obviously they don't do it on the state level. You can go in and and be able to testify. I mean, with a little bit of work, but you're able to go in and testify on the state level without that much trouble. But yet our voice is not being heard.
No, absolutely right. And as legal challenges and as initiatives come forward to challenge state and federal laws regarding the sex offender registry, here in Oregon, I'm chief petitioner for Initiative 3. It's a 2018 initiative to repeal the sex offender registry law in Oregon, and it's a tall order. Yes, we'll be collecting signatures, starting that process very shortly. But the issue is, imagine for a moment that we were successful. Let's say by the end of, in November 2018, that our initiative passes and the voters approve it. What does that say about federal law in Oregon? Those are things I don't know the answer to, but I mean, it's an interesting question to raise and to think about.
Right. Well, hopefully we've given a lot of people, something to think about during these, this two-part conversation today. I think we got a lot accomplished. Hopefully some people will listen to this, get a lot out of it. I really think that our next topic, when we decide to talk again, I think we should entitle it "Man Up." We need to grow some, we need to, gain some strength, grow some gumption, something, whatever term you want to use. We need to be a little bit more bold. We need to be more willing to raise our voice and more willing to do the work, that needs to be done. So, I think next time, Tom, when we do this, I've got one or two people I would like to invite into that conversation. So it'll be a little bit bigger and it'll probably be a lengthier conversation too, rather than the usual 20 to 25 minutes for aiming for with these ones. It just depends. We'll just have to see how it goes. But
forward to it.
Yeah. So anyways, that concludes our talk for today, and we'll see you next time.